Are you listening? Damn. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And welcome into another episode of the Damn Podcast here on the 24/7 Sports Podcast Network and powered by BeaverBlitz.com. I'm your host, Carter Bahns, joined as always by BeaverBlitz.com publisher Angie Machado here on Monday, February 13th, the day after the Super Bowl, which is still not a national holiday. Somebody needs to get on that. I don't think anybody wanted to go to work today, but alas, here we are getting ready to talk Oregon State baseball, which is now just days away. We are 4 days away from first pitch in Surprise, Arizona, Oregon State, and New Mexico, getting things underway on Friday. Angie and I are here to preview all of that and the campaign that is upcoming in this episode of the Damn Podcast. We'll also answer some of your listener questions, mostly revolving around football at the end of the show. And then we are back for round two of Name That Beav. Angie is going to try to stump me this time around, so be sure to stick around for that. We'll see who is smarter when it comes to naming Oregon State football players. Angie, I'm sure the people want to know which one of us has that information more top of mind than the other. I don't know. Stormwoods was I feel like that was a good one. I feel like I said you in the beginning, but you came back. So hopefully you're ready to.
Yeah, and I didn't want to start off too hard. So I had pretty, I think, because we kind of talked about trying to keep it in the 2000s. So I didn't want to go too obscure, but I think I got a good one.
Love to hear it. We'll get to that at the end of the show. But like I said, we are focusing mostly on baseball today. Before we get rolling, just want to tell everybody about this deal that we have at BeaverBlitz.com right now. It's 30% off your first year. If you are a new member, this is for an annual subscription. It comes out to $627 per month. Again, that's 30% off your first year if you want access to all of our VIP articles, which JP's Weekly Walk-Off, which we'll preview every weekend series of Oregon State baseball, will be behind the paywall. The only way you can read that is with a VIP subscription. So if you are not a member yet, again, that's 30% off your first year at Beaver Blitz. Angie.
I'm just going to give a quick tease as well, because I have been working all day today. I started last week for a feature we're going to run starting next week, and it's looking at the early top targets for Oregon State football recruiting for 2024. So I've been reaching out to these players. I have a pretty good idea of who Oregon State's top prospects are, and we'll start going with those next week. So that's another reason to jump in the lodge and at Beaver Blitz as well.
Absolutely. If you missed it last week, we had Spencer McLaughlin on the podcast. He and I broke down our way too early Pac-12 power rankings on the football side. If you haven't heard that, definitely want to go back and check that out. You can find that on our YouTube page or anywhere you find your podcasts. On our show page, you can find that episode with Spencer. Angie is back for the first time in 2 weeks. So I'm sure you've got a lot on your mind that you have yet to share. Let's start with a little Super Bowl recap. Unless there's anything else like super top of mind you've been sitting on. I'm curious not only who you were rooting for, which I have a good idea because there's only one team that had former Beavs, but also the best food you ate, favorite commercial, thoughts on the halftime show. Fire away. What was your biggest takeaway from Sunday's Super Bowl?
Well, I think I was kind of lame because Eric and Jack were actually not home, and all of my friends were like out of town. And so it was a total low key Super Bowl, but I enjoyed it because I got to watch the whole thing. So I didn't have any good food. Plus I'm kind of like on this shape up plan right now. So not really anything good, nothing exciting there, but the commercials. I thought my big takeaway was that the commercials finally, I think we've kind of turned the corner from some of the pandemic, more serious commercials, and there were some fun ones. I started right off the bat. I thought that Dunkin' Donuts one was cute with Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez. But I thought some good ones. The Popcorners one with the Breaking Bad guys, that one stood out. The Michelob Ultra kind of Caddyshack one caught my attention, but I thought they were fun. I thought the national anthem by Chris Stapleton was just stellar, super simple, like not a big performance per se. Like, I got a lot of pushback on Twitter because I said would be right up there with the Whitney Houston. And I mean, that was a performance. I mean, Whitney Houston, like, amazing. But I thought Chris Stapleton, I mean, it just seemed so simple and so effortless for him. And then Babyface, I have loved Babyface since I was a teenager. So I thought he did a great job with that. But halftime, I don't know about you, Carter, but my phone was blowing up with all of my friends and even Eric, who was watching the game on an airplane home. Is Rihanna pregnant? And then my mom texts, is Rihanna pregnant? And then my girlfriend, is Rihanna I mean, it was like going off. So congratulations to her. But what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think one of the all-time great games, just as far as that competitive start to finish. If it didn't end up being the highest scoring Super Bowl, it was just shy of it. Coming in, what was it, 38-35 was that the final?
Yeah, that was the
Off
final.
the top of my head, yeah. So I think the highest scoring Super Bowl was 75. So I guess it came up just short. But you had a lot of points scored. You had a close game, and unfortunately, it was determined by the officials, which is a point that I want to ask you, Angie. Obviously, covering football in the Pac-12, you are very aware of officials getting in the way of the action, and I felt like generally the discourse, at least on social media and on TV after the game, was like, sure, maybe by the rule that's a penalty, but it wasn't the most egregious holding call in the world. But a situation where if you're an official, you have to let that go and just let the players determine the outcome of the game, because it wasn't like, it didn't create that much of a competitive advantage that it was like, oh, how could you not call that? So I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence over that. My takeaway from the game was that it was unfortunate that an all-time classic like that in the Super Bowl had to be determined by a defensive holding call.
Yeah, I agree, because it kind of did kind of scream Pac-12, like inserting at the wrong time. That's the kind of play that happens basically on every big pass play. It wasn't, like you said, an egregious, like full-on grab. It had been happening all day long, and that was the first time they called it. So too bad. But I mean, a great game. Like you said, it was just a back and forth. I mean, at halftime, I thought the Eagles had it in the bag. You see Mahomes kind of going off limping, and they really had no answer for Philly. And then all of a sudden, especially that fourth quarter, just came alive. I was rooting for Philly just because of Isaac Seumalo, and then Noah Togiai is on the practice squad. My entire family was totally going for the Chiefs. So it created some good back and forth, especially with Jackson and I. Well, Jack was on the plane home from Boston. The text string back and forth was pretty classic.
I have to agree with you with the Popcorners commercial.
Yeah.
So what was unfortunate was they didn't actually show the whole thing during the game, because I don't know if you have seen the full commercial.
No.
They got most of it in there, but go YouTube that after we get off of here and go find the whole thing, because they cut over a couple of lines. I thought it was hysterical. If you haven't seen Breaking Bad, it probably didn't quite hit with the same gusto, but I thought it was pretty hilarious. That's our 2 cents on the Super Bowl. This is an Oregon State podcast, so we're not going to spend too much time there, but unfortunate to see Isaac Seumalo and Noah Togiai come up just short of getting a ring there. Angie, I was actually down in Corvallis on Saturday covering basketball. Great game, Oregon State.
After I
USC.
told you, okay, you guys, Carter texts me and says, I think I'm going to go down to the game. And I said, why? This is how I roll. And thank goodness you were there, because what a game.
I would say Oregon State's best win of the year on the men's basketball side. To grind that thing out, to shoot incredibly poorly, but still pull it out, defend your way to beating a top half of the team or a top half of the conference team in USC. It was an impressive win by Wayne Tinkle's squad, and hopefully that gives them a little bit of confidence moving forward that they can end the season on somewhat of a high note after what has been a disappointing season by most measures. But it was good to see Gill Coliseum, not full, but I feel like one of the better turnouts of the season, and those in attendance got what they were hoping for. They're on a beautiful Saturday afternoon in Corvallis.
Yeah, I was actually in downtown Portland watching my oldest son compete in a mock trial competition, and again, beautiful in downtown Portland. Just the mountains were shining, and it was a great day.
Felt like baseball weather.
Yes,
didn't
it
it?
did. And it's funny you say that because we are like knocking on the door to baseball.
Yeah, 96 hours approximately away from baseball season as we record this. I'm pretty fired up. Baseball season is one of my favorites at Beaver Blitz. We have a very, very passionate fan base on our site, and I cannot wait to cover this year's team. There are so many storylines that are really intriguing, and we want to highlight some of them here in our season preview. So we'll preface this by saying that we are here on Monday and we're going to speak with Mitch Canham and players on Tuesday. So we might get a little bit of clarity in the next, day or so on what the pitching rotation might look like, who we can expect to see in the lineup. I don't expect Mitch Canham to give us too much as far as that is concerned, but we might glean a little bit of information from that we can't get to here. So if you're listening to this after Tuesday, this might be a little bit dated as far as that goes, but we're taking a big picture look here anyways, so I don't think we'll have any spoilers as far as what Mitch Canham tells us. But anyways, this weekend, the Sanderson Ford College Baseball Classic at Surprise Stadium in Surprise, Arizona. Oregon State going back down to the desert once again to open the season. Action gets underway on Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific with a game against New Mexico. Saturday, Oregon State plays Minnesota again at 11 a.m. Pacific, and then they play New Mexico again on Sunday, again at 11 a.m. They close action in Arizona on Monday at noon Pacific with a matchup against UC Santa Barbara. So a 4-game set there in Surprise. They're only down there for 1 week. Oftentimes, Oregon State will spend 2 weekends down there and play a series against one single team in the second weekend, but they're only spending 1 weekend in Arizona this year before they come back for a very, very early home opener. Those 4 games in Surprise can all be streamed on Flow Baseball. Josh Warden will have the call on the Beaver Sports Network. Angie, are you going to be tuning in? I mean, I think I'll get the Flow Baseball subscription. Hopefully we can both log in if you want to watch so that we don't have to get 2 of them. But at the very least, how excited are you for this season to get underway with 4 games that I think are pretty winnable for Oregon
Yeah,
State here?
I'm excited for because it tells us that spring is around the corner. And then I think there's a lot of, I think this could be a building year for the Beaver baseball team. So I want to see kind of how they take these games, like you said, winnable games. But let's just see how they perform. I want to see some pitching. I want to see how the bats are. Just some preseason. It's a good time to get some kinks out. And like you, those are February 24th and through 26th is the home opener. That's a little, that's early, especially with the way the weather has been lately. Hopefully they can get those games in too.
Yeah, last I checked, it's forecasted to be in the mid 60s, mostly sunny down in Arizona. I was actually down there last year for that first weekend of games, and then that's about what it was. I think it touched 70 one day, but perfect February baseball weather there. The Beaver Blitz coverage, Angie, I know you have reached out to JP. Can you confirm whether or not he's doing a season preview edition of the weekly walk-off?
He is, and if you haven't read JP's amazing work, you're in for a treat. But it's not for the faint of heart. I know those previews are one of the most tedious aspects of the things he does. It's kind of like Carter when we do the season rewinds and the previews. It's a lot of tedious work, but JP, I did confirm with him, and he is up for the challenge. He actually said he's excited, and I told him I'd remind him that he said this, that he's excited to do the preview because he feels like he needs to kind of dig in and get to know this team a little bit too. So since there's some new faces, so you're in for a treat. The preview that will be run will be more of an overview of all the positions and kind of what to expect. Then as we get into the series, in the Pac-12, you'll start seeing the actual weekly walk-offs.
We're going to run that on Thursday or Friday or earlier in the week. Do you know yet?
I have not heard from him. I kind of just wait till I get it. I'm guessing it'll be Friday.
Okay.
But I have not confirmed what day that will run.
Yeah, definitely keep an eye out for that. The preseason weekly walk-off is it's always a great read, as the in-season ones are as well. But I know JP puts a ton of work into that. I will have coverage from Mitch Canham's press conference tomorrow. We'll also speak with a couple of players who will be named tomorrow on Tuesday. And then, of course, throughout the weekend, we'll have live updates during the games. We'll post our tournament HQ. We're going to run with the same format that we did last year. Have a little HQ for the series full of previews, and then we'll post our live updates there afterwards if you want to go find the recap. So we found that worked well last year. We're going to run with it again. No shortage of baseball coverage at BeaverBlitz this year. So the Oregon State baseball team entering 2023 here, looking to avenge last season's what I would call a disappointing finish. Yeah. It's hard to say that making it to a game 3 of a super regional that you're hosting is disappointing, but obviously coming up just a couple of runs short of making a trip to Omaha is pretty disappointing. Felt like with the talent Oregon State had on that roster last year, particularly on the offensive side, that maybe not necessarily a national championship was the ceiling, but at least competing for one and getting to Omaha felt realistic. So I think obviously coming up just shy of that is disappointing. But I know that the guys who are returning are using that as motivation. And Angie, I just kind of want your thoughts before we jump into all of this. I mean, is your expectation that Oregon State does avenge that and get to the College World Series, or do you view success for this team in what you called, and I think many people would agree, somewhat of a rebuilding year? Is success measured a little bit differently in a year like that, even with how far they made it last year?
I actually don't. I mean, I know, tomorrow when you talk to Coach Canham and the players, they're all going to be talking about Omaha, and that's the ultimate goal. And I love that. But in my personal opinion, early preseason, I think for this squad, since it is such a young squad, there's a couple injuries. We're hearing that guys won't be playing this season, or at least early this season. I really think, competing for a spot in a regional and earning that regional trip. I think this is a big rebuilding year. Things can change. They have a lot of talent. It's just a matter of how quickly that talent kind of gets up to speed and game ready.
We'll talk more expectations at the end of this segment, all sorts of, preseason polls, rankings, and what have you. We'll get to that at the end. But I want to start by just kind of highlighting some of the schedule notes. And we're going to go up and down the roster, pick some players to watch, project the rotation, starting lineups, and all that. But just from a 50-foot view of this season, the schedule, I think, lines up interestingly for Oregon State in that a lot of its tougher series come on the road, which I don't necessarily think is entirely favorable. But there are a ton of home games on the schedule, as there usually are. Oregon State's going to play most of its non-conference games at home. That home opener, like Angie said, set for February 24th
so bizarre.
Versus Coppin State. Angie, over/under on first pitch temperature at 5:30 p.m. on February 24th. I'm going to set that right around 42 degrees.
Yeah, I was going to say like 40. I'm going to go with the under actually on that, because I don't know. I'm just watching the weather change here today on Monday, and they're actually saying maybe a chance of snow overnight. I don't know. I'll believe it when I see it. Oregon, Portland weather. But it could be chilly on that the 24th in the evening there.
It was not long ago that I think Oregon State was down in Arizona, but Oregon was opening the season at home, or was at least the second week of the season, and it actually snowed at PK Park like the day before the game. That's what you run into playing baseball in the Pacific Northwest in February. We don't get a ton of snow, but it does happen. February 24th. I mean, we'll see. It's going to be cold. That is.
I am looking ahead.
You.
So I think my oldest son is a senior this year, and he's planning to attend GCU next year down in Arizona. So I don't know, Carter. I might have to head down if they're in Surprise again next year.
Totally recommend it. you and about 3,000 Oregon State baseball fans. I was extremely impressed by the turnout last year there at Surprise Stadium. So yeah, that home opener, February 24th through 26th against Coppin State, that's an opponent that you expect a sweep against for Oregon State. I think with a lot of opponents, you're going to be expecting a 2 out of 3 or a sweep. Whether that's fair or not, that is the expectation for Oregon State baseball with where this program is at. Hosting a program like Coppin State, I think it's kind of an ease into Pac-12 play, which creeps up really quickly because that Pac-12 opener set for March 10th against Washington State. So again, a lot of early season home games for the Beavs. You come back from Arizona, host Coppin State, and then you've got a non-conference, and then Washington State comes to town. Curious to see how the Beavers start Pac-12 play, because, I mean, when you look at where their tough series fall, it's kind of spread out. They have one in March, they have a tough series in April, they have a tough series in May. But starting with Washington State, I think, the Cougs have been solid, but not great. Gives Oregon State a chance to get some early season momentum there with a couple of cushier matchups early in the season, and then opening the Pac-12 with a team that's not necessarily projected to be in the title race.
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at that, and it's a nice way to start the Pac-12, because I think Oregon State will be expected to at least take 2 of 3 against the Cougs. So, it's not like they're starting off with the juggernaut of the conference. So I like how that plays out, but I don't like how many of the tough matchups, like you said, are on the road.
And that first one comes against Stanford the following week. So like you said, they're not playing the juggernauts of the Pac-12 in the first week, but they do it in the second week. Yeah. Go down to Sunken Diamond to play the Cardinal, who are projected to win the conference by the Pac-12 media. Again, I think 3 out of the 4 biggest series of Pac-12 play come on the road. This is the first one. It'll be nice to get out of Oregon at that point in March, because again, the best weather for Oregon State baseball doesn't necessarily come until like late April into May. Particularly last year, I mean, Angie, I can remember 2 to 3 games where it was like legitimately sunny, and that is it. I mean,
last spring was horrible.
Coldest, windiest, wettest baseball seasons I can ever remember. So I think going down to Palo Alto in March will be welcome, despite the fact that the Beavers will be playing probably their toughest opponent of this season.
Yeah. That, I mean, it's a tough way, but you know what? I would rather. Part of me almost likes playing the toughest games early, because you should be at full strength. Your roster should be at full strength. And you don't know. Stanford could be still trying to figure out their rotations as well, and some of their batting order. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. Maybe try to snatch 1-2 games from them. Which, I mean, if they could take the series, it'd be a great way to start. I don't know if that will happen. I don't expect that to happen, but to be able to take 1 game from the Cardinal would be huge.
Yeah, I mean, you're playing a series that's going to have Pac-12 title implications in the second week of conference play. Assuming Oregon State plays up to its potential and finishes the season in the race, I think that series very early is going to have some implications there. The rivalry series falls in Eugene this year. Oregon State hosted the 3-game Pac-12 series against the Ducks last year. They go down to PK Park to open the month of April. It's the 6th through 8th. There's actually only 1 non-conference game between the Beavers and Ducks this year. That comes at Goss May 2nd. So, normally they play 5 games, 3 in Pac-12, 2 non-con. Only 1 non-conference game this year, which I might look into that, but I believe, it's probably a scheduling conflict type thing. And then moving ahead to the end of that month, I think the biggest home series of the year comes against Arizona, April 28th through the 30th. Arizona, again, picked to finish 4th in the Pac-12, just behind Oregon State, a team that is perennially in the conference title considerations. It certainly was last year. That's, I think, the biggest home series of the season. I expect that to be sold out all 3 games. Hopefully you have some good weather by then, but definitely a series that Oregon State's going to want to get to in if it's going to compete for a Pac-12 title. And then they close Pac-12 play in the middle of May with a road trip to UCLA, picked to finish 2nd in the Pac-12. That's, again, you talk about the Stanford series, UCLA and Arizona. It feels like every year those determine the outcome of the Pac-12. And I think it's kind of nice for Oregon State that it ends the Pac-12 season with a series like that as well.
Exactly. And like you, I have that Arizona one circled just because of the ramifications last year down the stretch against Arizona. That there was, it got pretty testy at times. And down in Arizona, the fans were into it. I think I like that matchup. I like the fan base. I think both fan bases are intelligent, smart baseball fans. UCLA doesn't usually draw as big a crowd, so that one doesn't kind of concern me as much. But I have had that Arizona one circled, just that series. I think it's going to be a really fun one to watch.
It was a fun series last year, and
Yeah.
partially because, anytime you play in Tucson, you expect to go into the game and it's going to be like a 13-10 finish or like a 16-11 or something like that. I mean, just with how large that ballpark plays down in Tucson, it'll be nice to get that bit into a little bit more of a pitcher's park at Goss this season and kind of I guess even the playing field, so to speak, as far as that's concerned. So Oregon State actually closes the regular season with a non-conference series. So obviously, with the Pac-12 only having 11 baseball schools, you do have that open week, and it's not necessarily a bye week, so to speak, as you get in football, but oftentimes you see the Pac-12 schedule some easier opponents. Oregon State actually in the past has scheduled difficult. They brought Oklahoma State to town a couple of years ago, but they get Western Carolina this year. A little tune-up weekend before the Pac-12 tournament, I think. So, the Beavers will have to watch the Pac-12 regular season title be determined from the couch, effectively, because their last chance to make a push will come the week before at UCLA. But how do you feel about closing the season with Western Carolina before going to the Pac-12 tournament? Because I think there's something to be said for playing a tougher opponent at the end of the season. I'd like that because I think it tunes you up for Pac-12 or for the postseason. Whereas, if you play somewhat of a, I'm not going to call Western Carolina a pushover, but if you play a weaker opponent late there, I could see how that could lend to some complacency.
I 100,000% agree. That's why I like, the Pac-12 scheduling for football, getting kind of those non-conference, easier kind of tune-up games in, because I would rather play tough games down the stretch just to keep you really firing on all cylinders, and really tuned in to what you need to do, and not maybe taking a week off, so to say. And not that they're not trying, but an easier game. And baseball's a funny sport though, because even the teams that you're supposed to beat, things can happen in baseball. But I think it makes it harder to kind of stay up and when you have that momentum going.
Yeah. Those are the weekend series, or at least some of the more notable ones. Of course, Oregon State will also play the likes of Utah, Cal, UW, you name it. But as far as midweeks go, again, lots of home games for Oregon State, as is usually the case. They do host most of those. They will host San Diego for the first one. Then they'll play a 2-game midweek series against Nevada, one of 3 midweek games against Portland. Then they'll go to Seattle, come back for 2 against Gonzaga. Then they will host Seattle. They go to Grand Canyon, host Oregon, like I said, in that one-off in non-conference play against the Ducks. They'll go back up to Hillsborough at Ron Tonkin Field to play Portland, and then host Portland for the third. So Portland, the Pilots, of course, have given Oregon State a little bit of trouble in recent years, which, for the longest time, we came to just believe that was an automatic Oregon State win. But again, those midweek games against Gonzaga, GCU, Portland, like the last couple of years, we have seen Oregon State drop. I don't know if you could call it a concerning amount, but they've certainly lost more of those recently than I think they did in the Pat Casey era.
Absolutely. And I do think it's a concern, because I think it speaks to concentration and kind of like we were just talking about, and kind of keeping that mental focus, and that mentality that you're going to not play down to opponents, but you're going to just continue to play your game. And I think that's something that Canham will develop as he kind of matures into the college or baseball coach.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know that Oregon State's had a ton of pitching depth since Mitch Canham took over too. I mean, that's something that, again, takes a little bit of time to develop. So I guess we'll see this year, but that's where one of those weaknesses, I think, has been kind of exploited a bit by opponents in those midweek games in the past. Pac-12 tournament closes the season May 23rd through 27th down in Scottsdale, and then the NCAA tournament follows that. So that is a look at the schedule, some of the bigger series, more notable non-conference games. As far as the roster is concerned, usually at Oregon State, you see it usually leans kind of young, because you see a lot of guys go pro after their junior years. Very rarely do you have more than a couple of seniors. It's the case again for Oregon State, although I do think, again, this is a little younger than than some of the years past as well. As Angie hinted to, with a bit of a rebuilding year, you see 13 freshmen and 13 sophomores. So 26 guys are underclassmen to only 11 juniors and just 3 seniors. So, with all of the guys who moved on last year, you're starting to wean some of the COVID players out who, were here for 5-6 years. You're starting to see this roster turn a little bit younger again. So I do think it is fair to say that, you're going to spend some of the year developing guys, which of course can lead to a drop off in play at times. But as Oregon State has continued to build up on the recruiting trail as well, the talent that's coming in is higher as well. So, you look to players like Gavin Turley, who turned down an opportunity to go pro, who could be a huge player on this year's team. And then, of course, some of the freshmen from last year, Travis Bazana comes to mind. I feel like Oregon State baseball sophomores tend to be a little bit more talented than your average sophomore. So youth doesn't necessarily always spell disaster for Oregon State baseball, but there's something to be said for the inexperience, I think, too.
Yeah, I think my biggest worry is really the pitching rotation and having the depth. As we've seen kind of Oregon State in the past, it's just watching, college baseball in general, the teams that are able to make it are the teams that have that pitching depth that can go and go to a bullpen and really, ride those arms out. Yeah.
I think the national champion contenders year in and year out are the teams that go 4, 5, 6 deep in their starting rotation, guys. It's teams that have very solid Tuesday and Wednesday starters that are competing, because you lose one game in the tournament and you're going deep in your bullpen. Another look at the roster. So guys who didn't make the cut for the final roster, and again, Oregon State had to trim it down to it's either 39 or 40 off the top of my head. Guys who didn't make that cut will not play this year. That includes Brock Townsend, who was suspended by the university. Jabin Trotsky, who is undergoing surgery. Shout out to Joe Freeman at the Oregonian for his reporting on both of those. Tyree Reed did not make the cut again. We've heard from sources that's a lingering knee injury, the one that held him out last year. He has not fully recovered from that. Noah Ferguson, Isaac Hill, Hunter Cope, and Logan Miller round out the group that did not make the final cut. Let's project some of our key players this year, Angie. A couple of guys that I'm excited about, and let's just start with the rotation. So Oregon State only brings back one starter from last year, lost Will Frisch, who was projected to be, maybe a Friday night guy. I listed my 3 guys who I think are going to take on these roles. Angie, if there's one that you're excited about between my projected 3 of Jacob Kamatz, Jaron Hunter, and Trent Sellers, who do you think has the best chance to step in and be that Friday night ace?
I think Kamatz. I think Kamatz is the guy that's going to really take that next step. We saw glimmers of him this past season, but I think I'm looking for him to do some big things, and I'm excited to see Sellers. I want to see what he can do just after having the career he's had. But I think Jacob is the guy to watch.
Yeah, I think Jaron Hunter, what he showed down the stretch, really improving in the middle of the season. I go back to those midweek games at Oregon where he shut the Ducks down 2 weeks in a row, and it developed into a very solid 4th starter who I think is going to jump into this rotation and fit in very nicely there. But Trent Sellers, again, like you just said, the career that he has put together at the NAIA level. So played 1 year at Washington State, didn't get a ton of action, then transferred to Lewis and Clark State down in Lewiston, Idaho for 2 years. He is a reigning NAIA second-team All-American. He's the reigning Cascade Conference Pitcher of the Year. But listen to these numbers, Angie. 22-1 as a starter in his 2-year career at Lewis and Clark State. Last year, 14-0, a 1.98 ERA with 140 strikeouts to 22 walks.
Yeah, I mean those numbers are sick.
I know that's a lower level of competition, but that doesn't entirely matter for a pitcher. No. I think the transition is tougher for a position player or, a guy who's at the plate. But from a pitcher who's putting up those numbers, I think that translates relatively well. And I could see him being a pretty solid starter this year.
Yeah, that
He
like
is
you
a
said.
senior,
I mean,
mind you.
yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, I think there's such just little difference between these different levels, right? I mean, we've seen it. It's a matter of a few bats, but a pitcher's going to be good. A pitcher's going to be good. So obviously he's got some stuff. 198, 14-0, and 140 strikeouts. Yes, please. That's nuts.
Those are like Cooper Jerpy numbers from
Yeah,
last
yeah.
year, which earned him National Pitcher of the Year. Now, again, different level, but
Yes.
I
But
am
I'm
curious
anxious
to see
see
how
this.
that translates.
Yeah, I want to see how it translates because, yeah, I mean, if he can stay healthy, that could be fun to watch.
Yeah. If I was picking fourth and fifth starters, those guys who are going to be competing for midweek spots, some of those 4-game series like you're going to see this weekend, Ian Lawson and Victor Quinn are two guys that Mitch Canham pointed to as guys who really took a step forward in their development. I think you see them step into maybe the Jaron Hunter role from last year.
Yeah. And that's kind of what we see at Oregon State, the younger guys that kind of do those midweek, kind of the fourth, fifth guys. And then next year, hopefully be poised. But I love what I've heard about Ian Lawson. I think he could be a special one by the time he's done at Oregon State too.
Absolutely agree. All right, let's project our lineup in the field. I went and wrote this down, and so I don't know, Angie, if you...
I hadn't seen it yet, so
yeah, and I don't know if you have anything you want to add to this, but I'll start with some of the locks, and I think the first 4, maybe 5 here are locks. I think the infield is pretty much set in stone.
Yeah.
As we sit here a couple of days before the game,
Tanner
Smith.
Were you surprised that Jake Dukart hung up his cleats?
Called it a career? Not necessarily. I mean, again, you think about, like I mentioned earlier, some of the COVID guys who have been on campus so long. I mean, not only has Jake Dukart started as a quarterback on the Oregon State football team, transitioned into baseball full time, spent a couple of years at Oregon State, then transferred to another university at Texas Tech and played a year there. I think you just reach a point where you're just ready to move on. And for Dukart, who maybe didn't necessarily have a professional career in the cards, it's, do you want to go to school for another year, or do you want to just move on with your life?
Sorry, I had to take a little side there because I saw Thomas Ducart's name there, so I had to we hadn't talked about it.
Spoiler alert: Thomas Dukart.
Yeah. So no, I think your infield's set. I mean, that's pretty solid. I think Mason Guerra at third base.
Yeah. So let's go down the line here. Yeah, let's start with the catcher position, where I've got Tanner Smith penciled in. I think he's a lock to start at catcher. Obviously at catcher, you'll see a little bit of rotation. Oregon State has some depth there again this year, even with Gavin Logan moving on. At first base, Garrett Forrester obviously is going to get the start there. Travis Bazana at second. Now, we have heard, again, this is something that we've heard for almost a whole year now. Don't be surprised if he sees a little bit of action in the outfield. He did at the end of the season last year when he was kind of nursing a bit of an injury. I believe that was the case that moved him out there. Played a little bit of center field, I believe, in the Pac-12 tournament, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and he was awesome out there too. So, yeah, just an athlete.
Yeah, I think Kyle Dernetti at shortstop. Again, this is a spot where you would really have liked to get Jabin Trotsky back into the lineup, but unfortunately he will miss the year with surgery. So your shortstop depth and really your depth on the left side of the infield, I think, takes a bit of a hit with Trotsky going down. But Kyle Dernetti, of course, an elite defender. It's just a matter of, can he take another step forward offensively and become a more well-rounded player? That will determine, I think, his ceiling there. And then, like you said, Mason Guerra at third base showed a lot of flashes in the second half of the season. Third base was a revolving door for Oregon State last year. Errors left and right, not a ton of offense. And so I'm curious to see if Guerra can step in and be more of an everyday starter kind of guy who can give you consistent production in the field and at the plate. Let's move to outfield now. Angie, 3 guys who leave in Wade Meckler, Jacob Melton, Justin Boyd.
So huge. I mean, huge losses, not only just for their defensive skills, but they were huge at the plate too. I mean, I think when you look at this team, that's really, yes, you lose a couple pitchers, but that's where I kind of, the production those 3 guys had at the plate too, offensively, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to replicate.
And I think that's why you see Oregon State maybe being overlooked in air quotes by some
Yeah.
of the national rankings. I mean, Oregon State's unranked in one of them. Most of them have them at 23. I think most of the concern comes from the fact that you were replacing
Your
three of
entire
probably
outfield.
your top four offensive producers and who just happen to be your entire starting outfield. So who I expect to fill in for those three guys, I think Gavin Turley,
Yeah.
as a first-year freshman, steps in. I mean, everything we've heard about him is very reflective of the hype that surrounded Travis Bizana last year. And obviously, I mean, Bizana wasted absolutely no time. He was an absolute star in Arizona that first weekend, and then turned into one of the best freshmen in the country. So I think Gavin Turley has that potential. Again, turned down a professional career, an early start to his professional career, to come to Oregon State. You'll get 3 years out of him. I think he will bring a lot to the table right away. Brady Casper, who's been on campus for a few years now, we have heard from a couple of the players that he's one of those guys that could be like a Wade Meckler, who pops late in their career, somebody who's developed for a couple of years now behind All-Americans. Look for him to pop potentially this year. I think he starts this weekend. And then Ruben Cedillo, who transfers in from Lynn Benton Community College, like so many of these guys do. I mean, so many of Oregon State's key producers, particularly in the bullpen, have come over from Albany, playing a year or two at Lynn Benton. Angie, we talked about Trent Sellers coming in from Lewis and Clark. I think Ruben Cedillo, from everything that the players and Mitch Canham even at Media Day said, this is a guy who might not only start this weekend, but could turn into one of the team's better players transferring in from JUCO. Yeah.
This is another one that I'm very hopeful on, just from what we're hearing from like you said, the players and coaches. He could be a big addition that by May Beaver fans are pretty hyped about.
And then the last spot there, designated hitter. I mean, this is such a toss-up. I think this will, again, probably be somewhat of a revolving door unless somebody gets hot and sustains it. TJ Wheeler, if his vision is back to 100% or close to it, after that scary injury last year, he showed what he can do when he's at full strength. Obviously hit a grand slam to win a game in Surprise in the first weekend last year. So curious to see if he gets back into the lineup early this season. Thomas Ducart, like we talked about earlier, I think he could be in the rotation in the outfield, but if his offense has developed, I think maybe you see him get a little bit of time at DH. But then also it's an opportunity to bring in one of those freshmen.
I think this is going to be, especially early, this first month is going to be a lot of plug and play, just seeing how guys react and how they're looking. And I think we're going to see Mitch Canham go with the hot hand too. If TJ Wheeler is able to go and he's looking good, or, if one of those freshmen just seems in practice to be, feeling it, I think we're going to see, kind of like you said, a revolving door there.
Moving to the bullpen now, as we kind of round out our roster projections. Not going to go all the way down the roster as far as pitching depth goes, but just some of the top bullpen arms that we see as being influential this year. Ryan Brown at the back end. There's a lot of discussion about maybe does he move into a starting role. They stretched him out when he was playing with the Corvallis Knights. It sounds like, at least for now, he's going to continue to come out of the back end of the bullpen. Mitch Canham said, we don't necessarily have a set closer, but Ryan Brown will pitch in the highest leverage situations, whether that's the 8th inning playing matchups, whether it's the 9th inning holding on to a lead. That's very matchup dependent, but Ryan Brown will be that top arm in the back end of the bullpen. Ben Ferrer, I think will be Oregon State's primary long reliever. I think he is probably if not the most talented arm, the second most behind Ryan Brown in that bullpen. Somebody who you could start on the Tuesday if you needed to. I mean, they did last year, I believe, give him a spot start or two. Ben Ferrer, of course, I believe he ended up with an All-American honor last year. One of the top relievers in the country, statistic-wise, comes back for his senior year. I think sky's the limit for Ben Ferrer. And then just rounding out that group, AJ Lattery, showed a lot of flashes last year when he was healthy. Then Joey Munt, actually a name that hopefully Oregon State baseball fans haven't forgotten. He returns from injury. We've heard that he'll be back around April. Would really bolster that bullpen with some experience. He showed a lot of potential as somebody who, his throwing in the, if I remember correctly, because this is 2 years ago, was throwing in those upper 90s, a big imposing presence on the mound. And then a freshman who has, again, gotten a lot of hype from those we've spoken to, Mitch Canham, Travis Bazana, Garrett Forster, all hyping up AJ Hutchinson. No, there's only one N in Hutchison. Comes in as a freshman and, again, highly regarded by those who have faced him in practice.
I'm excited to see Ferrer because I think, and I'm excited to see where Munt is as well, because I just think, he was so imposing a couple years ago.
Yeah. A couple freshmen to watch for. I already mentioned Gavin Turley, Easton Talt, Dallas Macias, two of the higher rated recruits that came in this class. Dallas Macias, actually the Colorado Gatorade Player of the Year. AJ Hutchinson, as far as pitchers go, AJ Hutchison, like I just said, Nelson Kellio, Tyler Mejia, and Aiden Jimenez are three guys who Mitch Canham said are some of the more talented freshmen on the roster. All right, let's close out this season preview with some expectations, both from the outside, from the inside, and then a little bit from us as well. So Oregon State, like we've said, picked to finish third in the Pac-12 by the conference's media, behind Stanford, behind UCLA, and just ahead of Arizona. Oregon at fifth, and then I'd have to look up the list to tell you the rest. But those are kind of your top four, top five teams who are expected to compete for the conference title. Oregon State ranked as highly nationally as 18th by Baseball America. Three other polls have the Beavers at 23rd, and they checked in. I guess that averages out to around 20th or so. So unranked, I believe, in one or two polls, but most of them do have Oregon State ranked in kind of that bottom tier of the top 25, which is a ranking nonetheless. D1 Baseball actually released some tournament projections, extremely early tournament projections today. Has Oregon State as a 2 seed in one of the Texas regionals. I want to say it was the Texas A&M. Where is that campus? College Station.
College Station, yeah.
Yeah, the College Station regional. So obviously that has basically no bearing on what will happen come June, but at least that's a preseason projection. So all of that being said, I think there's a decent amount of respect being given to Oregon State, considering all of the key losses, the outfielders, some of the pitching. But Angie, to you, what defines success this year? You mentioned competing for just a spot to even get in the tournament.
Yeah, I think I would be happy if they made the tournament. Honestly, I think there's just so many question marks now. Mid-season, if I might change my tune depending on what it looks like, but there's just so many question marks in my mind that just replacing those three bats is to me huge. So that's where I'm at right now. I think if you make the field of 64, that's a win right now. Second seed, I think if you told me right now we'd be a second seed, I'd say let's go. But like I said, we'll do a mid-season. We'll obviously do pods throughout the year, but that's kind of where I'm at now. What about you?
I'm kind of, I don't know. I go back and forth because I think that there is enough returning talent, and combined with the fact that there are so many highly regarded newcomers coming in, not only as freshmen, but Trent Sellers as an NAIA All-American, Ruben Cedillo from Lynn Benton, who seems like he could be an opening day starter. I think Oregon State's going to retool and reload pretty well. And I think that raises the floor to where Oregon State, I think, is pretty reasonably ranked at 23 entering the year. I think the ceiling is hosting at the very bottom level. I think, if Oregon State hits its ceiling, it is probably hosting as a 15 or 16 national seed. So I think it's reasonable to expect the floor being getting into the tournament as a 3 seed. So if I had to say, this is how I think the season will go, I think projecting them as a 2 seed like D1 Baseball did is probably pretty accurate.
Fair. Yeah.
All right, Angie, that concludes our baseball season preview. Again, if you want to follow along with us, throughout the season at Beaver Blitz, we're going to have a ton of baseball coverage like we did last year. JP with his weekly walk-off. I'll be at games all year long with live updates. We'll have our tournament HQs. Angie will be in the lodge holding it down with our premium members. And if you're not a premium member right now, just a reminder that we do have 30% off your first year at Beaver Blitz. That comes out to $6.27 per month. It's a great deal for those who have not signed up yet. Please take advantage of that while you can, because these deals do not last forever. Again, baseball season with football coming right up. Spring football just a month away.
We're not even like 3 weeks? 3 weeks from tomorrow is first day of spring practice. Yeah. I'll be down there.
A lot of VIP comment.
Yeah,
a lot of VIP content coming your way soon. So we want to make sure that everybody listening to the damn podcast has access to that. And again, if you are not a member yet, 30% off your first year with an annual subscription. All right, let's close out this episode with a few damn questions, and then we'll go to Name That Beav to close it out. Angie, I think we only have time for a couple of questions, so I want to highlight the ones from the lodge first.
Yes, and I love Mr. G. Gray's because I saw this. It's such a good question. So
all right, I'll fire it away.
Okay, I'm going to ask you, would you rather see OSU built like the Eagles, run heavy, mobile QB, and a strong defensive line, or the Chiefs? Pass heavy, accurate but elusive QB, and a blitz pressure defense?
Super Bowl themed question. That's why I put it at the top.
Yes.
Very timely.
And I want to hear your answer because I'm going to give you some thoughts that I had yesterday actually watching the Super Bowl.
Okay. I think we're going to be kind of similar here. I like the thought of Oregon State being built like the Eagles, because that's kind of how it has been built actually recently. Very run heavy, mobile quarterback. Think the Chance Nolan era. I think you get more of that with DJ Uiagalelei and a strong D line, which actually Oregon State kind of had this year with the number one rush defense in the Pac-12. If that was the recipe to getting to 10 wins, I think you stick with it. So I think Oregon State kind of fit that mold, a run-heavy team with a somewhat mobile quarterback with Chance Nolan at the beginning of the year. But again, you get more of that this year. And if the D line can continue to improve, if you can continue to stifle opposing rushing attacks, I feel like Oregon State could dominate in the trenches on both sides again this year. And like I said, if it got you to 10 wins last year, what can it do if you have more talent this year? I think following kind of the Eagles blueprint there fits what Oregon State has at its disposal.
Yeah, so when I was watching the game, actually, it's like not having at a party, I was able to listen to and really watch. And the announcers actually went on and talked about just how the Eagles, with their they have the best offensive line in the country, that defensive front and that run first. They said this it's kind of the shift of the NFL right now. Is it's going even on first and second downs. Typically, you're just seeing the run, and even on traditional passing plays. But getting those chunk yards so that you don't necessarily have long. I kept watching it thinking, yeah, man, the Beavers actually really followed very closely kind of the Eagles, that, the strong offensive line, the run first, mobile quarterback. I like that, although you got me there, Mr. Gray, with a little bit of blitz pressure on the defense. But watching that first half and what the Eagles were able to do offensively and keeping that defense off the field, or keeping the blitz defense was not handling that very well. So no, I'm going with the Eagles too.
I also think that the Eagles' strategy of, hey, we're at midfield, it's a third and 7, let's just run it and set up to go on fourth, is very similar to how Jonathan Smith and Brian Lindgren have designed their aggression on third and fourth.
And going for fourth, yeah.
Particularly when they had Jack Coletto at their disposal. I mean, Jalen Hurts being potentially the most effective quarterback sneak quarterback in the NFL last year, I think is kind of similar to how the Beavers used Jack Coletto. So again, I feel like Oregon State was already kind of following the same model that Philadelphia found so much success with this year. And so if you can double down with it, if you can retool those positions, like finding a Jack Coletto, or if DJU does turn into, a very elusive,
but I like DJU
mobile quarterback. Then
DJU and a quarterback sneak. You don't need Jack Coletto when you have a 240 pound quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen what they've listed him yet. We'll see spring camp when it comes around.
Yeah.
That roster
Yeah.
will be released. But a great thought-provoking
Yes.
question
Yes.
from Mr. Gray in the Lodge. All right, moving on to this question from OCD Soft 01 in the Lodge at Beaver Blitz. Alton Julian missing spring camp, is it precautionary or a setback? Do you have any insight?
No, it's so you guys knew he had an ACL. He was
Yeah.
out for the year. He had to have another scope done last
Mhm.
fall, just to kind of clean up some scar tissue. That's why he's out. It's precautionary. He's good. He'll be ready to go. And I also, if you saw the news that Jack Velling is out for spring, I believe he's back. It's a shoulder, I believe. So he's been spotted on campus with a sling, which would be similar to like a labrum. So that's our guess there, but he is supposed to be back by summer. So not worried about that either.
We'll have more injury news during probably that first week of spring camp to get a little clarity on some guys. And I'm sure there will be a surprise or two as well on day one when we're down there and, so-and-so is not in pads.
Yeah.
Well, I guess nobody will be in pads on day one, but you know what I mean. Next question from William 1974. Will we have the pieces for a good secondary? It seems like edge rushing may be better. D-line should be good, but to be really good, the whole defense needs a little improvement. I think that's a fair assessment. And I think there is probably a healthy amount of concern around the secondary, just considering how much talent you lose with both of your starting corners, one of your starting safeties, and three guys who have been on campus for a long time. And, two of them at least are heading to the NFL Combine. How do you reload in the secondary? I think Angie and I are both kind of, I think we're kind of leading the charge on like, don't be concerned. Oregon State has talent in the waiting, but I'm still a little concerned about the depth.
I'm concerned about the depth too. I think it was huge news when Katana Ladapo said he was coming back, because that gives you a really key piece there. I think Ryan Cooper showed a lot this year and should take another big step forward. I mean, he was a first year in the system last year. I'm excited about Jaden Robinson, and I know he graded out. If you talk to coaches, Jaden Robinson actually graded out as one of the top DBs on the team those last 3 games of the season. So I think they're expecting him to take another big step forward. And but it's the depth. Akili Arnold, there's a lot of players there. It's just a matter of depth and taking that next step.
Completely agree. We had a couple of really fun questions come in, and I wanted to get at least one of them in, but I do want to save time for Name That Beav. So let's just really quickly hit one of them. And sorry to anyone whose questions didn't get answered, and sorry to anybody who left questions on Twitter. Again, we do like to prioritize the members in the lodge
These
first.
are both
we'll get
good
to some
ones,
of your
though.
Twitter questions next week, though. Let's start. Let's just do this one and then move on to Name That Beav, Angie.
Okay.
So from What in the Blue Hell OSU. They just simply ask spring vacation spots off the beaten path. Angie, first of all, are you going anywhere for spring break? Second of all, what are your favorite spring vacation spots?
Yes, Palm Springs. That's where we're heading this year. We're heading to Palm Springs or Palm Desert, I guess. I love going down there. I love going to the desert. But if I had my choice and like money wasn't an issue, I don't know. Like I would love to try to go to Costa Rica or something. I don't like off the beaten path. Like, what about you?
I'm actually going to Paris in March.
So yes,
So,
Carter's
yeah,
gonna miss a couple spring practices, but I got you covered. You gotta go. You gotta go to Paris.
Yeah. When anyone asks you, hey, do you want to go to Europe? You don't say no. That's exactly what happened last year. I went to Greece in that break between the first and second weeks of camp. I'll miss the first week of spring camp this year, but like Angie said, she's got you covered. So that rounds out our short but sweet question segment of this episode, because I do want to get round 2 of Name That Beav in, because Angie is going to quiz me this time. So
yes or no questions, and I got my pencil and we are like ready to go.
Perfect. All right. So last time we introduced this game where I picked a random Oregon State football player. We've narrowed it down now to since 2000, and it has to be a football player. The other person will ask yes or no questions to try to narrow it down. And the goal for me today is to correctly guess the student athletes in fewer than 11 questions. That's what it took Angie to get Stormwoods last time. So Angie, keep track for me.
I am.
And then we'll add it to the leaderboard, but fire away as I'll throw on some background music here.
I'm not firing away. You're firing away because I've got the. You have to ask the questions there.
Oh, I guess that's fair.
Yeah. You fire away.
Okay.
I'm gonna start dancing.
Was this player active in the last 5 years on the Oregon State football team?
No.
Okay. Did they have, or are they currently in the middle of a professional career?
Wait, ask that again.
Did they have, or are they currently in the middle of a professional career?
Yes.
Okay. Did this player play on the offensive side of the ball?
No.
Was this a defensive lineman?
Yes. Hate you.
Is it Scott Crichton?
No.
Oh.
Oh!
Oh, I know who it is then. Is it Dylan Wynn?
No.
Oh, I thought I had it.
Because
okay, so a little insight here. I was actually gonna go with Scott Crichton for you until we decided to flip it. Oh, man, that would have been funny. Okay, not in the last 5 years, but had a professional career as a defensive lineman. Anyone in the chat want to give me some hints? Defensive lineman, and it's not Dylan Wynn. Interesting. Okay.
I couldn't pick some of my favorites because then it would have been easy.
So, okay, did this person play for Mike Riley?
Yes.
Okay. Did they graduate before 2010?
No.
Oh, is it Kyle Pecco?
No.
Shoot.
You're at 9.
Oh.
There were a lot of D linemen that played in the league. Look at that.
Yeah, this is impressive. Oregon State's got more talent on the D line than we thought.
I know.
Okay. So it's not Pecco. It's not. Both of the Sayamalas played on the O line. Or was Andrew? Does Obum Gwasham count as a defensive lineman?
Yes.
Is it Obum Gwasham?
No. Your dad. You need to check out. Yeah, check out. Dad comes in clutch.
Is it Stephen Paya?
It is.
Okay,
12,
yeah.
dude. I beat you.
Woo! Shoot, you got me. I mean, I would say all of my guesses were.
They were solid.
They were solid.
They were solid.
Yeah.
Obum wasn't. I don't know if I would have gone Obum because I don't think he played pro, did he?
He
did.
He had
right.
a short
He
stint with the
rusher.
Seahawks.
Yep, you're right.
Yeah. No, Stephen Pye, obviously, I mean, that fits the criteria there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
you got me.
Yay, that was fun.
All right. Well, we'll try it again next week.
Yep.
I'll give it back to you, and I guess you'll just try to beat your own personal best because I'm not very good at this game. And you beat me.
I just have a lot more history, Carter. A lot more history. But
That's
you know what?
fair.
That just gives me more names to clutter up my mind, though. See?
Yeah, that's true. Although, I mean, even though I was like in middle school at the time, I was following Oregon State football pretty closely during the Stephen Paya era.
I was trying not to be super obscure, so I actually went to the list of All-Americans. That's where I drew my, and I thought if I went with like Brandon or James or Quiz or one of those guys,
that's too obvious.
Easy. So then I'm like, okay, we'll go Stephen Paya. I thought that was like pretty easy, but then there were a lot of guys that.
Well, you think it's easy, but then you remember,
yeah.
I mean, Crichton, Wynn, Pecco, like these guys are all NFL. Well, I mean CFL for Dylan Wynn, but yeah.
Nice work, Brad Baines and Tim Bedford. You guys both got it correct.
Yeah, shout out to the YouTube chat. Came in a little bit late for me, but
go take that up with your dad.
Yeah,
tell him you need to help you next time.
All right, Angie, anything to add before we get out of here?
No, I'm just super excited for baseball. And like I said, make sure next week, starting next Monday, the 20th, working the phones, talking to a lot of 2024 recruits, and we'll have position by position breakdowns of some of Oregon State's top prospects. Early look.
Sounds good to me. We'll have all sorts of baseball coverage this weekend as Oregon State kicks off or pitches off.
Kicks off.
Tees off.
Just...
kicks off the 2023 baseball season in Surprise, Arizona. We'll come back next week to recap the weekend that was. We might have to go later on Monday since they will play Monday afternoon. But we'll recap it nonetheless. Until then, you can follow her on Twitter at Angie Machado 1. You can follow me at Carter Bahns, and we'll talk to you next week for another episode of the Damn Podcast.